The deer run off as Emperor Joseph enters the scene and they meet with Salieri. The Emperor says his niece has asked him to advise her on a suitable musical instructor. Salieri assumes they are talking about him, which pleases him, until the Emperor reveals it's actually Mozart he is after. Salieri kicks into manipulator mode once again and says this.
My concern is to protect you from any hint of favoritism.
And so the Emperor says, and the scene is finished, and Salieri's suggestion is granted. What I think is interesting about this scene is Salieri is stood on the ground after having been in a carriage. He's presented himself in a very formal manner for a conversation he was expecting to be quite formal. Whereas the Emperor and his niece and the others are riding horses as if they're just stopping by for a quick chat, a relatively informal way they've approached the situation. And yes, while it's been established already that the Emperor is a very agreeable person who kind of just goes along with what other people say, this is just yet another way that the concept has been established. To the Emperor, this is just a quick little chat. To Salieri, this is a small business meeting. To the Emperor, no decision being made is incredibly crucial. And so Salieri's suggestion is just a casual little decision that the Emperor decides casually is a good idea. Am I explaining this enough? You get what I mean. Anyway, Count von Strack is in the background and he's also in the following scene, when he is telling Mozart about this arrangement to get him to submit his work as a means to get a job as a music instructor. Now, all we really know about von Strack is that he's all for German operas as opposed to Italian operas, suggesting he may have a sort of small rivalry against the Italian courtiers. But it's clear from the following scene that he finds Salieri's suggestion was completely fair. I think it's safe to say von Strack is a kind of on-the-fence man between the courtiers and Baron von Swieten, who may have been a bit more empathetic towards Mozart, and it seems he was the best person to be here in this scene and in the next one with Mozart, as we can tell that compared to Count Orsini Rosenberg, he clearly doesn't hate Mozart like he does. But by von Strack having literally heard the Emperor suggest to bring on Mozart and then Salieri change his mind, tells us he doesn't have anything against Salieri, but that he's also just a messenger who will say what he needs to say out of obligation and respect for the Emperor. But the truth is, it is quite weird for Mozart to have to submit his music in order to get a royal position when the Emperor has already heard his music, and he knows he's a great composer. And so we can feel Mozart's disappointment in this conversation. But it strikes me that von Strack is the person who originally mentioned that a German opera would be a good idea, and then called Orsini out on his bullshit when he lied, saying the language had already been decided. Upon revisiting the scene at the theatre, I noticed during the Emperor's criticism, von Strack is completely staring at him and smiling, and in subsequent scenes he's in, he seems to always be agreeing wholeheartedly with the Emperor. I think what this shows is that when we first find him, he is simply a patriotic German who agrees with what the Emperor suggests in the first place. He manages to just faintly hold his ground in the show-off scene, but when it comes to the big picture, he is also quite a conformist who is ready to go along with anything as long as the Emperor would like it. I mean, him and Baron von Swieten are the only courtiers who never try to manipulate the Emperor, but I think it's a nice touch that we are kind of led on to believe he is someone to agree with based on these interactions, but that now when in a one-on-one talk with Mozart, he is stern and somewhat unreasonable in his lack of empathy over this silly arrangement. We have lost von Strack as an ally for Mozart. Mozart's career is already coming with a downside. We obviously must mention that Mozart, of course, is quite egotistical in what he says in this scene, even if the things he is saying are definitely true.
Mozart, you are not the only composer in Vienna.
No, but I'm the best.
When von Strack says this line,
Mozart, a little modesty, it might suit you better.
I can't help but feel like Mozart is starting to see von Strack as his father. Leopold seems to understand that the way he brought up Mozart did contribute a lot to his spoilt ways, and so this seems like something Leopold would say to Mozart, sort of in a way that shows his regret. But when von Strack says this line, it's as if Mozart's father has just entered him momentarily like a conscience, telling Mozart to fix up his act, which angers Mozart, but we can see in his face he kind of agrees. Mozart asks who was on the committee. Von Strack says, well, the usual suspects. But it's clear from this moment right here that Mozart is somewhat self-aware and understands he can be a bit too much at times. But he still refuses to submit music because he feels this situation is ridiculous and he chooses to stand his ground, which is understandable but obviously the wrong thing to do. If he needs the extra money, he should do what they ask of him. This refusal starts an argument between Constanza and Mozart. Is it Constanza or Constanzi? Because I swear people just be saying either or. I'm just gonna go with Constanza because insert Seinfeld.
No. It was not trash.
Was it in the trash?
Yes.
Then it was trash.
How are we supposed to live, Wolfie? Do you want me to go in the streets and beg?
Don't be stupid.
All they want to see is your work.
Shit.
What's wrong with that?
Shut up!
Mozart's trying to distract himself with pool or snooker, whatever it is. I mean, he's by himself, so I have no idea what a game he's playing, but whatever. He's using this as a way to entertain himself. I guess this would be the equivalent of watching Netflix late at night to distract yourself from financial troubles. We would expect Mozart to be making music to distract himself, since it's what he loves to do. But it might be that at this moment in time, making music would remind him of the committee of Italians who just pissed him off. Constanza, unlike Mozart and most of the other characters in this story, seems to be quite grounded in reality in comparison. She sees things how they are and doesn't seem as irrational as Mozart and Salieri and the others. I mean, with Mozart, he's ambitious yet impulsive, and especially in this scene, it's clear he doesn't realize the consequences of his actions, and his ego actually makes it harder for him to see that. He simply sees that because he is a very talented musician, that he must be owed things. As for Salieri, you know, just grow a pair, get laid, continue writing music, and don't get too jealous, yeah?
How do you handle anxiety? Anxiety. Just don't worry about it, mate.
But yeah, it's for this reason that it makes a lot of sense that Elizabeth Berridge would play this character as if she were a modern woman, compared to everyone except maybe Mozart. She doesn't speak with a historical sounding voice, she speaks like she is from our time, which I think actually transcends to the expectations of historical movies, and also movies from the 80s. What I mean by this is, I feel like the 80s had a particular kind of acting. Here's a montage to show you what I mean.
Ferris? We better try something else. This isn't working.
Someone has been in my room again. I hate that.
Who's that guy in the coat think he is, anyways? Bo Diddley? Veronica's into his act, no doubt.
You're just dying to screw McCormick, aren't you? Aren't you?
You're so stupid.
Whereas I feel like Constanza in particular seems to be acting way more modern than a typical 80s actor. I mean, she delivers her lines very minimally, like she's a real person and not an actor on a stage. People see this as an issue, and by people I mean one comment. They see her as a bad actress, partly because she sounds like a modern American woman, and partly because she speaks quite shyly, or maybe too realistically. And first off, to think it's bad acting because she sounds like a modern American woman, it's like, do you realize none of these people here are actually supposed to be American anyway, or English for that matter? They're German and Italian. Like, the language is English so we can understand what they're saying. But what's wrong with someone speaking in a modern manner if it's not actually supposed to be English? The way the accents are being portrayed in this film is something you may not realize was clearly carefully thought of. Notice how Mozart and Constanza sound so casual, and almost everyone else around them sounds posh and proper. This is because they both stand out, and they both come from a slightly different world than all of these other characters. They're the kinds of people to go crazy at parties like this, whereas people like Salieri and Orsini Rosenberg seem to have been very sensible, law-abiding, God-loving citizens in their respective upbringings. So it makes sense to give them more casual accents because it makes it much easier for us to relate to them. We can tell the kinds of people they are by the way they speak. It reminds me of something like The Lion King. The characters' personalities are expressed through the way they speak, which is why Scar and Zazu are both very posh Englishmen, to highlight the way they take life very seriously and both care about order. Mufasa has a sort of standard English/American hybrid accent because he is both a king with responsibility but also a loving father. And Simba speaks with a casual American accent because he isn't responsible and wants to have fun. It's pretty much the exact same thing in Amadeus. The posher the accent, well, the posher the person. But like, anyone who has a problem with Constanza having a modern sounding accent clearly just needs everything in the film to be super historically accurate, which doesn't even make sense because, as I already said, she's not actually American. We're not supposed to take their accents for the truth because they never spoke English in real life anyway. This is a point that extends to a lot of things in this film that I might go over if I do more research. There's things like all the set designs in those operas. I think people say these visuals would not exist in those times and it's very historically inaccurate, and like, it's not supposed to be accurate to how it was in real life, but it's painting an idealistic version of it, and the creators of this film did an amazing job with how it's all being presented. They did this exact thing with Man on the Moon, which is a scene I do like, the Carnegie Hall performance. The Carnegie Hall performance is amazing and so visually interesting, but if you watch Andy Kaufman's actual Carnegie Hall performance, you can see that it really didn't look that interesting, and some things happened in the film that didn't even happen in the real show. But this is the point of art and film. We recognize these moments in history as iconic events, and they're events that may have only been iconic had you actually been there, and may not seem iconic in an accurate film recreation. It just makes sense to spruce it up and use the freedom of expression to make these things seem absolutely unforgettable, just like they were when they actually happened. We see that Constanza is clearly annoyed with Mozart over his refusal to submit his music, but she cares about their financial stability and their well-being, and so she feels as though she has no choice but to submit the music herself and not tell Mozart. In the next scene, Salieri is playing the piano with an opera singer. I don't know exactly what he's doing. It could be a singing rehearsal for an opera, it could be so that she could just learn a song. I don't know, they don't go into the specifics about Salieri's specific roles other than court composer and piano teacher for the emperor, but it's really not important. I just realized though that another reason Salieri would have tried to stall Mozart's employment for the teacher role is because he was anxious it would lead to Mozart stealing his role as the emperor's piano teacher. So yeah, let's just consider that. Let's consider that, shall we? Another metaphor about Salieri's feelings of desire are displayed here when he is admiring this woman and then feels the need to eat a dessert. I don't know if it's a biscuit or something, but I'm just going to call it a dessert even if it might not make sense. But in this moment we can see how the taking of dessert seems to occupy him from continuing to play the piano, and the opera singer gives a panicking look as if to say, I can't keep singing while you eat that. Now I don't think he actually did stop playing the piano any longer than he would have had he not eaten the dessert, but this moment is just here to demonstrate his desire and the way he suppresses it. I think a normal film may have just made him look longingly at her as she sung, maybe got distracted for 2 seconds and then went back, but this symbolism being used just incorporates more concept, which is why it's a recurring thing in this film. It doesn't only represent his love for women, it represents his love for the art, and it also represents his comfort zone, as it's likely these desserts here are some sort of Italian assortment. He eats dessert every time he feels so overwhelmed with a longing of something he can't get. It's also the reason why when Salieri's servant, doorman, assistant, servant, tells Salieri that Constanza is here, the woman Mozart has in his life, his passion, Salieri's like, oh shit, Constanza is here. Constanza is Mrs. Mozart, Frau Mozart. I need one more of these.
Lord have mercy, I'm about to bust.
We also need to pay attention to Salieri's servant. I looked him up. He's called Philip Lenkowski.
The big Lewinsky.
I just wanted to point out who he is because all of these minor characters like him clearly have some sort of significance in the dynamic of the scenes they are in. We can see through this scene and in the next that this servant seems to be a very suppressed, perhaps underpaid employee who craves to have just an increment of the lifestyle Salieri leads. His puppy dog face shows us this, and some people may think his face is too dramatic or unrealistic, but I think that's the point. I think it helps draw attention to this character we might just place in the background. He has very little lines, but it's very important for us to see how he feels, and if he had just toned down that subtle yearning face, we definitely wouldn't have picked up on it. To me, it's like drawing. When you draw big faces in a graphic novel or painting, emotion tends to be more subtle, but the further away you get, the more expressive, so you can see the emotion at any size. And while we do see his face close enough in a literal sense, the fact that he is a minor background character again makes us less aware of his presence, and that's why I believe his face is dramatic. So the servant stays fixed by the door while Salieri speaks to Constanza. Constanza appears in a wide shot with a veil covering her face, meaning she came here anonymously to prevent others from mentioning to Mozart that she had come here. I think it's important to mention the fact that Salieri was not the only person she could have come to. She probably could have come to Orsini or Bono Boy, but the fact that she came to Salieri could potentially be something Salieri is perceiving as a gift from God, an opportunity to have power over something in Mozart's life. It's safe to presume right now that he is thankful she is here, and that he may use this opportunity to keep Mozart from getting the royal position. His plan is to simply take the music in, and then just reject Mozart from the position, and that's it. We of course know that this will come to change very soon, so Constanza lets him know that she came here on her own accord, and Mozart doesn't know. She tells him that they're desperate. Salieri uses this time to send his servant away. Notice how he's completely forgotten that there's a woman in there possibly waiting to continue a session. Salieri's attention has been completely focused on Constanza since she is closely associated with Mozart. The servant leaves, as always, keeping a close eye on the situation as long as he can as he slowly closes the door. The reason I bring these things up about the servant is because it points out just how entitled Salieri is, and that he isn't the only person in the world that experiences feelings of yearning. Salieri yearns for Mozart's talent, Salieri's servant yearns for Salieri's life, and perhaps all Salieri needs is some self-awareness to realize he is not suffering as much as he may think he is. But this fascination with Mozart's godly music is slowly sending him down this path of isolation in which he can't see outside his little box, but we can, through his servant, at least for the time being. I know it's just a face and I may be overanalyzing, but I really doubt they decided to have this amount of attention focused on the servant if it wasn't significant to the story or to the world building. Anyway, during this conversation, Constanza mentions how impractical Mozart is with his money, and with this sentence, Salieri sees how Mozart and her may be irresponsible in other areas too, and he thinks that he may be able to get what he wants by breaking some social barriers between them, to make them feel more close. He starts off by offering her an Italian delicacy, nipples of Venus. This works on 2 levels. It's him offering his metaphorical desire. This thing he uses to suppress his jealous feelings is being shared with someone who also wants something, bringing them on the same level. He's also trying to make her see him as someone on his level and rank. It also works in that he is engaging in dirty innuendo, something he knows she admires since she loves Mozart so much. She laughs when he calls them nipples of Venus.
Capezzoli di Venere. Nipples of Venus. They're Roman chestnuts in brandied sugar. Try one. Go on, try one. They're quite surprising.
They're wonderful. Thank you very much, Your Excellency.
Don't keep calling me that.
And then she says, "They're wonderful, Your Excellency." Don't call me that. His plan didn't work because she still addressed him with that very royal title.
I wasn't born a court composer, you know. I'm from a small town. Just like your husband.
And for some reason, he thinks he may have reeled her in. So he tries to ask if she could leave the music there and come back another time. She says she can't, since Mozart would be frantic if he knew they were missing, since they're originals, and irresponsible Mozart doesn't make copies. Salieri now feels closer to Mozart's music than ever, since he's in the presence of the very makings of his ideas, as opposed to copies of the ideas that had already been created. Now I know I've been saying this a lot, but I promise you, this time what I'm saying is the truth. This is my favourite part of the entire movie. This is the scene that won him an Oscar. This is the scene with such a great shot. I have both cried and had goosebumps while watching it. This sequence is called...
These are originals?
Amadeus Mozart.
Don't use Squidward.
Before we get into the scene, I will just point out, this film says Mozart's drafts didn't have any mistakes or edits or revisions, and in real life Mozart did have those things, so this is a fictitious element used to exaggerate Mozart's intelligence as a composer. But what is true is that Mozart did have a genius level IQ, and I think if this movie is going to portray Mozart as an annoying nitwit, they can't really also make him a genius through his dialogue, so it makes complete sense that they would do something like this. He's not perfect as a person, but let's make his drafts perfect to simply acknowledge that he was a genius. I mean, this legendary scene wouldn't have been effective if it showed all Mozart's revisions and mistakes. Salieri looks through the music and supposedly we are hearing exactly what he is reading. I just realized I don't have much to say about this sequence other than just watch it. This is one of those moments that has no subtext, no metaphors. What you see is exactly what's happening. We are now in the mind of Salieri, slowly discovering just how amazing Mozart's music is. Now I don't want to let you listen to this moment without explaining how I feel about this music and how this particular piece is possibly the best thing they could have chosen to play here. It's Mass in C minor, Kyrie. I had pointed this out to family members and friends. The simple reason why Mozart's music is so heart-wrenchingly emotional, it all comes down to these two words.
Such unfulfillable longing.
Let me explain. This is happy music. This is sad music. But this is unfulfillable longing. Picture you're at the gates of heaven and you can see all the happiness inside and you can hear it, but you can't get in. No matter what you do, you just can't get there. That's what I feel some of Mozart's work manages to do. As I say, I'm not a music theory expert, so I don't have the proper terms to be able to explain what I mean with music theory, but I can certainly explain with feeling. There's just something about Mozart's melodies that sound like this perfect vision of happiness and fulfillment, but they're just not fully there. There's this little edge of negativity, a kind of nostalgic, reminiscing sound, like you missed something, but that you also never had it in the first place. Just listen to this. I really hope you see what I'm saying with this. It's just something that you don't hear much in other pieces of classical music. It's something that sets Mozart apart from many others. Rather than doing rising and falling arpeggios in major keys, Mozart is the kind of person to do a rising, then dropping to a slightly higher note than before and starting the arpeggio again, like this. As opposed to this. The writing is just so poetic here, that's all I can say. Mass in C minor, Kyrie continues as we get to this moment. Now before you watch, remember, unfulfilled longing, at heaven's gates but can't get in.
Here again was the very voice of God.
I was staring through the cage of those meticulous ink strokes at an absolute beauty.
It's that moment right at the end that might seem quite funny if you haven't fully immersed yourself in the things Salieri is feeling. But watch how Salieri appears to imagine to not only be holding Mozart's music close to his face, but also he tries to take a bite out of it. This is how the dessert metaphor has come full circle. We associate desserts with the art, the fantasy, the love, everything he desires, and we witness him imagining what it would be like for him to actually eat Mozart's music. I love how the metaphor has become real. This shot contains the quintessential unobtainable fantasy, and all of these subtle moments throughout the film have culminated in this moment. Just watch that moment again with the music.
At an absolute beauty.
Tell me you didn't feel that bite. I have nothing else to say about this sequence, so I kind of have to move on, but I don't want to. I mean, where do you go from this moment? I mean, he says, I was staring through the cage at those meticulous ink strokes. You see how his hands represent him holding onto cage bars, sheets of music, and dessert at the same time. It's like a trifecta of metaphors all working with one another to create such strong imagery that transcends what you see on the surface of this frame. I also love the use of the word absolute. I mean, just read all the definitions of the word absolute and you'll find a way to interpret them in the context of this sequence. So Salieri is so overwhelmed by the music that he drops the music on the floor. We see Constanza about to eat another nipple of Venus. We even saw her try to eat one while she was looking through the music. While she knows she is most likely allowed to have them, she still doesn't fully feel close enough to Salieri to know whether he would allow her to have more or not, demonstrating that the barrier is still up. Had she just confidently gone in for more, it may have portrayed her as having let her guard completely down, trusting Salieri. I also think if we put that ever so faithful dessert metaphor to use, we could potentially interpret it as her need for financial stability in her and Mozart's life. She is determined to get Mozart that job, but also nervous, in that she doesn't know exactly what will happen, much like how she doesn't know how Salieri would feel about her taking any more nipples of Venus.
Is it not good?
It is miraculous.
And at this moment, Constanza feels as though the barrier has been removed by a tiny amount. She is persuaded by Salieri's unabashed honesty about how amazing Mozart's music is, especially since earlier she may have heard him agree with the emperor about his notes. Granted, she was busy working her way through the theatre, but she still could have heard it. Constanza then goes over to pick up the music, and she is now on the ground looking up at Salieri, demonstrating the power dynamic shift that will now overcome her unexpectedly.
Come back tonight.
Tonight?
Alone. Some service deserves service in return. It's a post all Vienna seeks. If you wish it for your husband, come tonight.
I'm a married woman, sir.
Then don't. It's up to you.
Salieri leaves, and Constanza is left conflicted by this ultimatum. I just want to go back to the beginning of this scene to point out the blocking, because I think the blocking of this scene is so simple yet so perfect. They start standing at a distance, all barriers up, no trust. Just a simple request made by Constanza, and they are at the same playing field. As Salieri wants something just like she does, Constanza sits down, demonstrating she is relatively comfortable and trusting and sincere. Salieri gets the servant to leave, and then he sits, to come down to her level, in an attempt to get closer to her, to earn her trust. Salieri gets the chance to read Mozart's music. He stands, as if having the music in his hands gives him power. He turns away from
Constanza
as he becomes isolated from his surroundings to fully immerse himself in the music. He drops the music and turns around as if he's come back to earth with a revitalized spirit. His new plan comes to his mind. Constanza, with her guard relatively down, kneels beneath Salieri's level to pick up the music, only to walk into Salieri's trap. Feeling victimized and conflicted, she stays on the ground as Salieri marches away, feeling all the power at his fingertips. Just amazing blocking. It's also the end of part 4. Goodbye.